So I started getting harassed around the time of the royal wedding. The moment that people knew I disagreed with some things about my sisters.
I grew up as an only child, and I wished I had siblings.
It's like everything. It's lie upon lie upon lie.
Hello to all my gorgeous, good-looking friends. You are tuning into TRG's series covering the Markle vs. Markle defamation lawsuit. If you are new to the channel, welcome. For those who are returning, thank you for coming back and supporting my work. I'm always grateful to have this like-minded community to discuss the beloved royal family and the cultural impact of its members on society, particularly in America. Okay, before I get into this, let me just put the disclaimer, I am not a legal expert. I am simply just reading what's in the public court files and giving my interpretation and observations/opinions. Please do your own research and come to your own conclusion. This video is a continuation from the video before this one seen here, in which we began going over the dismissal motion that Meghan is making to get this case dismissed. I left off talking about Section B and questioning whether or not the exhibits from the original complaint were going to be still applicable because in Meghan's motion to dismiss, she cites that many things were excluded from the FAC, such as Jason Kanoff's email, as well as the transcript for the Oprah interview. Two very critical pieces of evidence that do tie Meghan back to these statements that Samantha says were defamatory. I was a bit worried, and through further research, I was glad to find that Samantha did respond in opposition to Meghan's motion for dismissal, which does include the necessary supporting documentation. I'm glad to see that Samantha's team have their bases covered and they put up a solid argument here. Most importantly, Jason Kanoff's email and the Oprah Winfrey transcript are still in play. But in this motion to dismiss opposition, Samantha does a great job at proving that false statements purported to be fact came from Meghan. She also did a great job at proving publication and communication of defamatory statements were either done by Meghan or to a third party. She articulates statements made by her sister were malicious and negligent, and she also articulates the kinds of damages and harm caused. Now remember, in order to win a defamation case, there are 4 components that have to be met. In order to meet them, you have to build the case, which is why discovery is so important, to show that Meghan was malicious with her intentions and this was done on purpose to harm Samantha. So in yesterday's video, I showed you this initial email that was dated November 12, 2018, indicating that the actual catalyst for this beginning and urgency surrounding it was because Meghan was starting to be called out for being a diva. And we heard grumblings because they just came back from their Australia trip where they had 2 aides suddenly resign. And this actually kicked off exposing the facade that Meghan was painting with Samantha the week prior calling Meghan out for lying about paying for school herself.
It was through scholarships, financial aid programs, and work study, where my earnings from a job on campus went directly towards my tuition, that I was able to attend university.
I think this was the point, in my opinion, that people in the UK started to question Meghan a little bit more because we're starting to leak about Meghan's bad behavior. And then add on top of that, Samantha coming out and calling Meghan a bold-faced liar and saying that her father paid for all her school. Meghan felt threatened that the facade that she had worked so hard to build around being this fraud was now being exposed by none other than her family. So yeah, she was enraged and definitely motivated to cut both, not only Samantha, but as well as her father, because after that, her father spoke out saying, no, that's not true. I paid for her school and gave her everything, paid for everything. And the fact that she didn't try to contact him after the wedding, despite he had 2 heart attacks, made her look even more shitty because she was lying. And this is what was threatening brand Meghan because she sold the world on being this humanitarian and feminist who supports women. And at the same time, here she is treating her own family so cruelly. And getting this book, Finding Freedom, going, of course, was an urgent matter because she needed to get on record her truth before the actual truth caught up with her. So now let's take a look at this famous email to show you that there was a clear agenda that Meghan was trying to accomplish with this book, which was discrediting her sister as well as distancing herself from her father. In addition, the book was also used to cover up other things that were coming out about her, hence the reason why the book took so long for it to be published. Her narrative about the tiara, her narrative about how awesome she was at her job as a royal. She took digs at Catherine. I mean, let's call it what it was. She was trying to manage her brand and her image through this book. And it started with throwing away her family. So when we look at this email, as you can see on December 10th, Jason Kanoff is responding to an email that M, meaning Meghan, wrote to him. And it says, "Very helpful, thank you. Also shows we've been on exactly the same page, which is good." So this is Jason saying to Meghan, you know what? This is great. I'm glad I'm aligned with you. And he confirms his receipt of it. This is what she writes to Jason. "Hi, Jason. Thanks very much for the info below. For when you sit down with them, it may be helpful to have some background reminders. So I've included them below just in case." And then she says, "Please let me know if you need me to fill in any other blanks. Thank you." So obviously, she was a willing participant in getting this book together and out with her narrative. So when we look at how the email was constructed, it appears that Jason Kanoff sent Meghan a list or bullet list of topics that were going to make up this book. So what I did here was I put a box around each of the topic headings, and then I put a brown arrow next to each bullet point that Meghan was responsible for contributing to. And I did this to strictly make a point. You'll understand the reason in a second. As you can see, Meghan begins building this false narrative around her family here. She specifically begins with the topic of her half-siblings. Now, if I was giving information about my family, don't you think you would start with your mother and father first? But no, there's a clear agenda. As you can see, she begins with her half-siblings. And it continues with the focus then being on Samantha. Almost 70% of these bullet points pertain to lies about Samantha. What I get a kick out of is where it says all of these facts can be validated by anyone who has known Meghan since childhood or afterwards. What I find interesting is that she put this line right there before the rest of the family information about her father and Doria. You would think it would make sense that you would say that about the entire family, but she specifically puts that in after all these defamatory statements about Samantha. When you think about it, no wonder why Scobie didn't go and fact check, because he was getting this information directly from Meghan. So why would he go and fact check any of this? And even if he was to go fact check, who would he speak to validate all of this about Samantha? Wouldn't it be Samantha? And I believe the reason why Samantha didn't go after Scobie and sue him was because she had her own book coming out and she would be able to set the record straight there, coming directly from her. And besides, if she were to sue Scobie, what would she get out of it? He has no money. So why would she even waste resources in this long drawn out process to do that? So I can understand why she didn't make the attempt to do so, because at the time, nobody knew that Meghan had real connection with the book, even though people suspected it. You didn't have any evidence of it. So then after going after public enemy number one, she then goes after public enemy number two, which is her father. So here she puts 2 bullets about her relationship with him before she cut him off, which was admitting that they were close, but then again brings up Samantha, blaming her for the reason why she no longer has a relationship with her father. Now watch, this is going to come into play when she has to sit on the stand and explain why she trashed her sister so terribly. I can really see Megan now blaming Samantha for the reason why Megan no longer has a relationship. Even though Harry claimed it in the Netflix documentary, of course, their story will change again, and now blame will shift onto Samantha should this come up as to why she no longer wanted her father in her life anymore. So the email continues. So what do you notice? Let's begin at the top. So the topic here with H's November 2016 statement, this was just copy and paste. Then the next bullet item, she doesn't even respond. She doesn't know what background she has to put for that, so that's skipped. She doesn't fill out anything about the engagement proposal, bullet questions, nothing, doesn't talk anything about it. But she makes sure that she talks about what was going on with the apartment and the renovations, because guess what? At that time, people were questioning the amount of money that was being put into the renovations. And there was a lot of criticism around it because it was the taxpayers' money that was going into these expenses, let alone she had been wearing very, very expensive clothing and going out flashing, all this new money. The public didn't like that, so they had the right to express their opinion, and hence the reason why Megan felt that she had to address this criticism. And finally, at the end of the email, she addresses the bit about the tiara, because that was also another truth that was exposed. And even more sad about this is that she felt that it was necessary to also include at the very bottom this one point saying, also, Megan does not work with a stylist. Blank is her close friend, which we all know is Jessica. But I find that it's so petty of her having to put that in, but she can't mention anything about her mother. But then again, this book was never about being authentic and sharing truth. This was about covering up all her bad behavior, as well as an opportunity to trash her sister because, hey, she dedicated a full chapter saying a problem like Samantha, and in the process also cut her father off, because I believe that when she sent this email to Jason Knopf on December 10th, she was enraged because her father had spoke to the press again as an attempt to reach out to Megan by letting her know that he loved her. I recall not many people really understood that Thomas had been reaching out to Megan privately for a while, and she never returned his call once, never responded to any texts. And sadly, so many of us here, at least in the United States, didn't have a very positive view of both Samantha and Thomas because of what the media did. That was backed by Megan. Once I learned how Megan was using social media and her PR firm to paint these false narratives and actually attack others, that's when I started to open my eyes about how the mainstream media can be weaponized and the dirty tactics that are used by people like Meghan Markle to slander, to defame, to intimidate, to inject fear, and to control. Thomas, and especially Samantha, didn't deserve the abuse that they took when Megan could have easily had put a stop to it. Now, going back to this email, as you can see, she could have written about other stuff, her accomplishments or lack of, but she took the time to specifically focus on her sister. So everything that was written here was deliberately done to punish, to inflict harm, and also an attempt to silence Samantha for telling the truth. For the 5 years worth of hatred that Samantha had gotten and threats to her life, and Megan did absolutely nothing to stop it and knew that it was going on. Samantha deserves justice, and we cannot have people like this in society influencing our youth for profit, but then on the back end, they're inflicting pain and abusing their own family and whoever else she wants because she feels entitled that she can and above the law. So no, this needs to go to trial. So just to give you a little sample of the word salad nonsense that Megan's document contained, in one of the sections titled "As a Matter of Law," Megan did not, in quotes, publish any of the statements in Finding Freedom. And it says, under Florida law, a plaintiff in a defamation case must allege and prove that 1, the defendant published a false statement, 2, about the plaintiff, 3, to a third party, and 4, the falsity of the statement caused injury to the plaintiff. With respect to the allegedly defamatory statements in the book, Finding Freedom, all claims based on those statements fail for the simple reason that Megan did not make the statements. In legal terms, plaintiff fails to establish the first element of a defamation claim, the requirement that the defendant published a false statement. Because the publication of a statement is a necessary element in a defamation action, only one who publishes can be subject to this form of tort liability. We just went through all the statements that Megan herself gave approval on in writing. So technically, that is published, and it's published to a third party, which then in turn published it in a book. I don't know, to me, that sure meets the mark on all the criteria. But here's what Samantha had to say. While there is no dispute that the authors of Finding Freedom are Omid Scobie and Carolyn Duran, Mrs. Markle, Samantha, possesses evidence to establish that the Duchess played an integral part in authoring the material contained within Chapter 12 of Finding Freedom. And at all times material, she intended that the false information be published and disseminated around the globe. The email from the Duchess to Jason Kanoff, which is attached here too, and marked as Exhibit 1, is proof of this. However, as this is a motion to dismiss, the mere averment itself is all which is needed, and evidence is not required. Then she continues on by saying, the Duchess. Now, let me pause there for a second. I'm not sure why they keep referring to Megan as the Duchess in this document, but it's highly irritating. They need to switch this back and call her Megan, because what it's doing, essentially, is making me really hear the word Duchess. It does not have the same luster a royal title would have. That's just my thoughts and opinion. What do you guys think? Anyhow, continuing on. The Duchess had control over what was put in the book and even provided the information she wanted to be included in Finding Freedom, so the true position could be communicated to the authors to prevent any further misrepresentation, or what they call it, misinformation. And finally, this last point in 8, it says the notion can be evidenced by and through the Duchess' email to her communications secretary, Jason Kanoff, ahead of a meeting with the authors of Finding Freedom in December of 2018. Samantha's lawyers did a great job at making this document succinct and to the point. Megan's lawyers, on the other hand, appear to be throwing out a whole bunch of cases in order to deflect and confuse people. None of it really is defending Megan per se, just a lot of fancy words and word salad thrown in there. And what's interesting is that maybe 10% of her document actually has what you really need to understand, like in this next example. Bullet point D says, there is no overlap between the December 2018 email and Finding Freedom anyway. Publication aside, for Megan to be liable for Scobie and Duran's statements, plaintiff would have had to establish that the allegedly defamatory statements are actually traceable to her. Not just, I'm sorry, but this is, I wonder if Megan actually sat down and told her lawyers, this is what we gave. This is what came out in the UK. Be prepared. I don't think so. For some reason, I think she held back a lot of information and probably lied to their faces, now putting them in a similar situation that she put Jenny Afia in the UK. But anyway, continuing on. That the allegedly defamatory statements are actually traceable to her, not just that it was reasonably foreseeable. Some of the statements might be used by the authors of Finding Freedom. There's a difference of giving information for somebody to write a book, but the information that you're giving is theoretically factual or should be factual. And if they do decide to take it and change the words and play with the words for creative rights, that's on them. It's still factual. But the fact that Megan gave all lies, they took it and they might have rearranged words, but it's still lies. the way that they're trying their best to position this to break the nexus, I'm sorry, they fail. Before even reading what Samantha's going to say, like, they fail, especially since you guys saw what this email looked like and we went step by step. There's no way you can't say that that evidence there is not defamatory and untraceable back to Megan, especially when Megan is the one sending it and saying, yeah, I will help you more if you need additional information. I can't make this up. So Samantha's legal team slays it again and challenges this very same point by titling it, "There is an overlap between the December 2018 email and Finding Freedom." And it begins, bullet point 12, "The statements made in Finding Freedom lead right back to the Duchess. It is not as though the publishing of her false statements were reasonably foreseeable that some of the statements would be published in Finding Freedom. It was a sure thing." And I agree with that, because she was adamant about making sure that the story was accurate. As stated above, for purposes of a motion to dismiss, a court only looks at the four corners of the pleading to determine whether a plaintiff has sufficiently pled her cause of action. Rather, the court should assume that all factual allegations contained within the amended complaint are true and construe them in favor of the plaintiff. And that's all she can say. She has put facts on the table. Mrs. Markle, Samantha, stated in her amended complaint that the false information contained within the book came from Megan herself through her agent and communications secretary. That is all that is needed to survive a Rule 12b motion. So I put this question out to everybody in my audience. If you were part of the jury and didn't know anything about Meghan Markle, never saw this email before, and you saw it, let's say, for the first time today as we reviewed it, honestly, what would you think? Having no background of all the shenanigans and deceit we have witnessed over the last 5 years, would you look at that email and say, yeah, she is definitely tied to it, and yeah, and with facts, not with emotion, Samantha is able to prove the statements, well, the majority of them are lies that caused a tremendous amount of harm, not only to her mental state, but also her physical state, and can show that in evidence? Yeah, I think she has a really good case, especially around the damage and harm that these false statements had caused based off of Meghan's lies and the public turning on Samantha for telling the truth. Imagine getting all these kinds of threats on a daily basis. Now, these are just a few that I quickly pulled to show you that these threats are real, and having this go on for the last 5 years and Meghan do absolutely nothing, but instead continue to harp about one stupid article that somebody wrote about her family coming out of Compton. Samantha never asked to be a public figure, and all Meghan could have done was issued a statement, just as she did for her mother, to back off of Samantha. But the only thing Meghan did was support it from behind the scenes and stayed silent. So she's just as guilty as those threatening Samantha, and she needs to be brought to court. This has to come out. And I wonder if the discovery portion of it, she would be able to get the palace to unseal that bullying report. It's worth a shot. The worst that can happen is they say no. What do you guys think? I'm going to stop right here. Don't you worry, I'll be back soon with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
I was such a fraud.